Actually, not again. For the majority of you, except the audience, today it was the start of 5 courses, part of the summer school 2019. I hope everything went well today. It was super hot in the city, not only in the city. Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce 2 presentations, part of the public program. Presentation by Bernhard Rüdiger, who also runs one course that started today, and presentation by Hristina Ivanoska, an artist from Skopje, from Macedonia. Each presentation will last about 40 minutes. After 2 presentations, we'll have an open session with questions if we want to discuss more. I'll briefly introduce Bernhard's bio, or part of it. I will not take a lot of time. So Bernhard Rüdiger was born in Italy, lives and works in Paris. He graduated from the Accademia di Belle Arti in Milan with Luciano Fabro. Currently teaches in Lyon. I have to mention that Lyon is a partner institution this year for summer school. He's the editor of the magazine Tiracorrendo and was co-founder of the artist gallery Spazio di Lazzaro Palazzi, a very busy venue in Milan art scene from 1989 to 1993. Especially important for us also how artists create space for similar, let's say, work that we try to do here. His work confront visitors with the physical experience involved in object, body, and space. I'll just also read the title of the lecture to give you some more information, and the text is in the other space, so you can have the text there. So the lecture tonight is called Resilience and the Practice of Art, Apprenticeship of the Form as a Dialectical Approach into the Subjective and the Collective. The floor is yours. Thank you so much, Bernhard.
So, good evening. I had prepared something much more intellectual and complicated, but it was frustrating for me, so I changed my mind tonight. And I tried to do the same, to speak about the same object without so much okay? Try not to have so much references and theory, because it's boring theory. Or let's say theory is not boring for the one who do it. It's boring for the audience. Theory is boring when you cannot apply theory to an object. So I will try to speak much more about the object and a little bit less about theory. And then if you are really way hungry about theory, we can speak about it with a beer, because theory with beer is much better than theory without beer. So I will try to speak about a question that it has become more important for me in these last years, in the experience of teaching and in experience as an artist. This is the question of, I will start the time. I didn't start the time, excuse me. This is the question of what is a relation to a singular experience. I'm a singular person. I've been born in Rome in '64. I grew up in an art scene that was neoliberal, hardly neoliberal in the 80s. The space you were mentioning, Albert, was a space that reacted very radically to this neoliberal situation. It's too late for me to change, let's say. What I did in the singular way of understanding things has to do very much with the perception I have as a singular person that makes out of me someone who had experience. And this experience is gone. It's done. I cannot change it. In those days, since 5-10 years now, we speak very much about singular experience, putting it in first place. Gender studies, post-colonial studies, and other opening ways of thinking about art and art theory has changed very much our approach of this question of singular. What's very problematic for me now, nowadays, is that we switch very easily from something that is singular and personal to something that is political and collective. To say that my experience is significant, it's very important for me, but very difficult to demonstrate in a public space. I'm an arrogant guy. I think that what I do is important. I even think I have to expose it, and even I think that historically it's important. And then in the end, I also think that someone should look at it because it's political. Very nice to say it, but not so easy to demonstrate it, because all is based on singular experience. What you see is my workshop, and this is a way I re-expose some of the models I do. It is very linked to the problem of shape. This is now still in my workshop since now 9 years. It is the last big reorganization of my work I did for myself, so it's a kind of atlas for me, in which I can understand my work through time. It goes from 86 to 2011. But that's not the object, even if we will see some of these objects. I will begin with the drawings I did last year in Prishtina. These are bed hairs I smashed with a hammer on paper, on a book, and I need my text. Okay. It was a rainy year, it was not hot, and there were very much bed herbs in the city. So I was collecting in the afternoon herbs, and with a small hammer I was smashing them on paper. Let's say that I don't want to hammer. No. This should work. Excuse me for techniques. So I don't want to philosophize with hammer strokes. As it was, excuse me, I think it's a little bit too loud. So when I hammer hairs, I hammer an object on a paper. By hammering an object, I eliminate the object. But there is a trace on the paper. To make a joke, I don't want to make philosophy like Nietzsche did, by hammering. For Nietzsche, hammering meant to make philosophy so that, like a hammer on a piano, the chord of reality could resonate. I'm also hammering very much in my work. But what I was trying to do in Prishtina by hammering some plants, I was trying to make resonate reality. I will come back to this work later. So I have to do a little bit theory to get further. What means that I have a singular perception? I'm a singular guy that looks at a reality with some tools I had from the family, from the country, from the school, from whatever. I can only work with this. But what does it mean that I have a perception? There is a theory of perception. There are several theories of perception. Phenomenology thinks very much about this question, but also art has thought very much about this. Let's say that one thing that seems to me important is that in art history, in modernity for me begins with Giotto, the very beginning of Renaissance in Italy, until for me modernity ends with the generation before me, let's say Gerhard Richter or Ioannis Kourtesis or Vita Conci are for me the last modern artists. For them, perception has to deal with the notion of shape. But when we say shape in English, we mean the cut out of something. It's a flat object that is cut out. So in art theory, artists developed other ways of thinking about what is an object, what is a seen object, what is this thing I see in a singular way. And one of the main, I think more important approaches has been certainly this of Paul Klee, who in the 20s, in the Bauhaus teaching, worked very much on this notion of I don't have all the images here. Worked very much on this notion of Gestalt. That means, let me say, in German way, form said in German way is die Gestalt. That means that thing that when I look at it, not the thing generally, only the thing I look at it, becomes in front of me, body. That means Gestalt. For Paul Klee it was a very important object because he thought the shape as something that is becoming body in the moment of seeing it. So, gestalten in German is to embody, I am the object that is embodied, that becomes a body, that becomes Gestalt. That presupposes a thing that seems very easy to say, but is not in philosophy really very easy to say, that my gaze is active. We think normally on perception in modern scientist culture as a reception. It's not a reception for Klee, it's a perception. Per is the word that says that I'm acting it. I'm acting the gaze. So it's a very important thing in modern art to think the perception as an active action of something so deeply singular that I cannot share it. I look at the object that becomes body for me. This is a starting point that is in modernity, I think, one of the bases on which we think about art. The second question that Klee works on it, but Klee works very much on it, but I don't have now, I don't talk you about all the references, so I will explain it very easily. What Klee says is that to have this effect of embodiment, I have to distinguish one object from the others, very simply. That means that I have to identify it, to give identity to this object, so that all the other objects has no identity. The object I look at becomes significant because all the others are not. So I see one object in front of me that becomes a body, and all other things I always see in reality all the day long are switched off. This mechanism functions not only on reaction. So let's say I have a lighting and I see the light, I bloop, my eyes open up and I see something. But works also, and this is very important for Klee, with memory. That means that I know so much objects that this one, only this one, is different. So to see something, to perceive something for Klee means that the object
is something so new related to other objects. So there are two questions. One question is to perceive it is to give body in a singular way that no one else can understand. And second thing, there is something that is common. I have a culture of the object. I have memory of objects. That means that I have an horizon that is behind me. This is my native city in Rome, as someone tried to draw it. It's a very bad designer. But this symbolizes the skyline of what is the place I was born. The place I was born is the place I was used to. And Rome is a Baroque city. The first time I really lived in other cities that were not Baroque, I could not find myself in space, because I was so used to Baroque places, to Baroque organization of space. This is the unknown, what I don't know about me, that is the culture. For me, culture is the contrary of knowing, is all I don't know, I know. I only know that I didn't know that I know in the moment in which I see a new shape. When I see a new shape, I say, aha, it's different from. And in the moment I can say, it's different from, it's because I have a culture. And in this moment, what else is the culture? Can be everything, not culture of very cultivated people. I mean, everyone has culture. That does mean that when I see something, when perception becomes an active gaze, and the thing in front of me becomes body, it is because it is different from what I knew, and now has become an object. So, the real thing is the experience of the form, of the shape in art, takes place when someone can recognize something as singular and different. So shapes are not the same for everyone. This is one of the main questions of Klee, of Schlemmer, of all these artists of German art in the 20s. The problem was, what is a shape if a shape is singular? But time has gone, and we are no more in the 20s in Germany, and that's a good thing for the moment. But what has changed? Because when I tell you that I hammer bad herbs in Prishtina, and I pass for a very funny guy for the people here in the town, it's also that I smash down the object that I was supposed to look at, as if there was no more object. This is one of the problems I have been working very much on. And it began with a very intuitive way in an exposition of the 90s, 92, in Florence. I had a very huge space to expose. So instead of exposing some pieces in this huge space, I closed the door with some stairways, two stairways, identical stairways, going up to a kind of spot on which you were your eyes were about 4 meters from the ground. So you were standing in a very huge space, looking at your neighbor, doing the same experience. The construction was also due the way that you had to go through a space that becomes thinner, then you get out and you don't know, should I now stand up in the empty space, what shall I do in the empty space? But what is important to me is that in this moment there were nothing to look at. So you get up, you are on the space, you are always thinking about what is now the situation, will I fall down or not? So you're thinking at your body, you are concentrated on your body, and in the very moment in which you begin really to look at something, there's nothing to look at. Normally, in Klee's theory, when nothing happens, because there's not an object, there's no process of embodiment, there's no gestalt. But it was not this. in the moment in which you stand up on this kind of spot, you begin to look at as if you saw an object. And this was a very interesting point for me in my experience as artistic experience. What does that mean? That I look at nothing as if there was something to see. It was a long work. Now I'm speaking about 92, so you see it is in prehistorical times. But in the process of thinking, because doing and thinking to me are separated. I cannot think when I do. So I think on my works about a distance of 10, 15 years, not less. So I don't show you recent work beside the drawings I show you. I show you because I cannot speak about it. So in 92, I know now, but I couldn't say it, that the question was that without an object, the viewer still was looking at, but at what? And there began a huge part of my research, theoretical research, my artistic research, all the big part of my work. Because now I'm much more clear with this. What does that mean that there is no more object? Has our experience of reality changed? Historically, anthropologically, I mean. Does that mean that humans look at things differently? One of the answers I have been studying on a long time, and with some of people here, we have a research group, we have been working since 15 years on these subjects. One of the answers I know now is that even in the condition of the nothing to be seen, we produce something that is to look at in the sense of Gestalt. Marguerite Duras in Hiroshima Mon Amour, in the film Hiroshima Mon Amour of Alain Resnais, 48. It's a huge artwork. So if you don't know this film, please look at it because it's a very important object. In Hiroshima Mon Amour, in the beginning, you have a kind of introduction, about 20 minutes, that is a footage composition, and some scenes are filmed by Alain Resnais. And in this footage, in a given moment, there are two bodies that are making laugh, and they are speaking about the fact that you never saw. And the man, who is a Japanese, says, you didn't saw Hiroshima. And the woman says in a voice off, I saw this and this and this and this. And one of the things she saw is a new desert without reference to other deserts of the world. I think that the Hiroshima bomb was nothing more than the accomplishment of what total destruction has been through, beginning with all the wars of the 18th, 19th century, of the 20th century, and the First World War was one of the biggest inventions of technology to destroy bodies without leaving traces, to destroy cities, to destroy places. The bomb of Hiroshima, this sentence is said of these images. This is a footage of Japanese soldiers some weeks after the bombing. The desert of Hiroshima is a new desert because there is really, literally nothing to see. What is culture for us normally? My culture is a Roman culture from a Japanese, or culture for everyone, is the city, the difference between a stone and a body, the way we eat, the way we die, the way we remember, the way we have clothes on us. All this makes shapes possible, because shapes are the difference of what we know. But what happens in a moment in which total destruction, as an experience, as a concrete experience, has destroyed all relations? So what is in the first films the Japanese made on Hiroshima, it's a very interesting thing that all this thing, the dust is very important, because the dust is the confusions of bodies books, clothes, houses, and all the films concentrate on this dust. What interests me here now is that what I could say about the landscape I had behind me in Rome as being a Roman born in a Baroque city is no more possible after Hiroshima. The possibility of the emptiness exists as such. The horizon is like this. One of the theoretical questions is now 20 minutes, so I have to step forward. I will not stay so long on this theoretical question. But in psychoanalysis, there is one question that is very interesting. That means that some of you have been working on this subject. I saw in one of the programs last week, the program of trauma, the question of trauma. In the trauma, translated by Benjamin as shock alertness, experience of shock. In the trauma, any narration is possible. To say it very shortly and very quickly. Normally, in Freud's theory, I have some impression from reality. This is the first step. But it's a good thing that I don't remember all the impression I have in a day. Imagine if the impression of your tooth washing or the impression of walking on the street was as so important as, I don't know, the content of the course you have today. So we don't remember all impressions. Impressions are not memory. For Freud there are 3 steps. I have impressions, I have traces of impressions, and after a kind of work done without any attention from us, some of these objects, of these impressions, becomes memory. So I walk over the street, the fire is yellow, 5 minutes later I see a yellow taxi smashing down a bike. Yellow and yellow becomes in my memory something that I memorize. And so in the day I will remember these 2 objects because a kind of connection has construct a narration. So for Freud there is impression, traces, narration. And at night when we make a big mess out of it, but this is another question. These are the dreams. The deconstruction of that. Normally you live like this. What is the experience of the First World War? And Freud is one of the points of Freud's new orientation. Is that in the condition of shock, the impressions, the first steps, are so heavy and so much that the attention that could make traces of it is switched off. So I will never remember a real shock. Shock is something that has not been seen. But what means Benjamin when he said that it's a shock alertness? He means that I cannot remember it. It will never become a trace. It will never become a narrative. So that's why soldiers never speak about their experience. They cannot. They have not. They have been in a condition of experience by that, but they don't have a narrative of experience. So I cannot tell you my trauma. But trauma comes back with different kind of real experience. Let's say every night I dream about a yellow taxi. This yellow taxi is not the object. You see, when we speak about the object, getting back to my drawings. The object of the drawing is no more there because I cannot have any trace of it. But another object will stay in place. So he takes the place of this experience. And for Benjamin, that is the singularity of the theory of Benjamin, is that this becomes an expression of time, not of experience. So that I will have a clock in my mind that says, you was not there, you was not there. Was not there. I was not there, I was not there, I was not there, and I stuck in a time that has been stopped by the shock alertness, by the trauma, because I always stopped stepping back to that moment that is missing in the construction of memory. So, mainly, let's say, this is a shock erlebnis. But what is interesting now for me in this question, for Walter Benjamin, the individual, the modern individual, so Benjamin is working on the 19th century and of the non-experience of the modern man in Paris. So in capitalistic condition. But that is another point, I have no time to speak about this. But the experience is spread and dislocated in a radical opposition between a fragmented and isolated form of Erlebnis. I've been living this, I've lived this, but I don't have the trace of this. And another different diachronic mode of Erfahrung. That means that Erfahrung, let's say it with more express clear words, Erlebnis is the experience of an event. It is in present time. I make the experience of. It is contemporary to me. But Erfahrung is this kind of construction with traces. That is the experience caught in its evolution to expertise. I have an expertise of what has happened to me, so that I can tell it to my children, I can tell it to someone, I can speak around the beer about it. Because I have an expertise, that means they had the memory as a storage. So, what is resilience is this conflict between Erlebnis and Erfahrung that have to be repaired, somehow be bring together. But what interested me beginning with these stairs in the 90s is that there is no object. And even in absence of object, I can make art. Big artists make art, like Bernhard Rüdiger. There is no object in the stripes of his last exhibition, of his exhibition for the 70s. In Dresden, you have no object in his historical painting. Normally he's seen as a historical painter. There's no more object. So the question is now, what do I do when I look at shapes without objects? What is Gestalt? I will get over those. Let's say the question is, with the drawing of Schlemmer, what is the gaze, the subjective gaze, in a condition of total destruction, let's say, if we see it historically, or of total capitalism, of total neo-capitalism, of total non-possibility to reference objects as culture, as memory. What interests me, and in this the artists continue to work. Artists never stop to work, and they still invent forms. So how do we deal with this? This is the question of the resilience. I show you a little very... This is my work that becomes crazy some years ago. And one person made a little film of it because the wind was so strong that the object becomes crazy and sounds heavily. This was the exhibition in which the same object you saw in the other film was shown. When we look at this object, we could say that it is something that to put out some gas or it's an industrial object. You can say that this is an object that moves with the air. It's a bell. Let's say, in terms of Gestalt, we could say that it becomes something because I have a culture of bells. So when it sounds too quickly, it's the bell of the war. When it sounds too slowly, it's the bell of the death. We have a culture. But what if we don't look at it in a cultural way, with memory of culture? What do we see? And the question is for me now the most important. How is it politically? Can I say that I do a political work if I am in condition of non-object? Said in another way, I have 9 minutes, I will try. Said in another way, What does that mean? That when I see something as a subject, I did this work as an artist do it in his workshop, in a very subjective way. Now I'm speaking about it 14 years later, but I could not say nothing at the time. But the person, the one who will be the visitor of this exhibition there, will see my bell ringing in the wind, will say, who's that crazy guy? It's nothing. What is it? What is that? Is it a shape? Is it a form? Is it a drawing? Is it? You cannot bring it to a place. It is too big. Also, it's too loud. It's a machinery. It's not a piece. Not a piece of art. It's not a painting. It's not. You see, you cannot do something with it in the sense of what in the 20s could have been thought of being a shape. But I think it's political. The title is Locus Desertus, the place of the desert, and the subtitle is Petrolio. Petrolio is the last work of Pasolini, of Pierpaolo Pasolini. That it is based on a non-narrative possibility. The possibility, no more than for Pasolini at the end of his life, before dying, the last works he did were around the problem that how can we build narrativity in a condition of non-narrativity? And for Pasolini, before our present way of thinking about the data, it was an accumulation of data. So this roman is a kind of accumulation of data and repetitivity. You go through 37 pages of sexual acts, repeating the same act. So you cannot go through. You cannot read this text as a Roman. You have to experience it as a kind of non-narrative experience of speech, of words. So Petrolio is the second title of this piece. But the question is that also Pasolini thought that his work was political. So let's go back to the question of shape. If shape is the perception of a singular body in his history, as a body and as a culture, I can only see in a singular way. But nowadays, when we think about gender studies, post-colonial studies, we always say this singular experience is political. My question is, what does that mean with this shift from singular to collective? What does that mean when I say I have a trauma in this because I am in a minority of whatever, or I have a very bad experience in life, so my experience of what is violence in society is significant. You see that there is a very dangerous shift for me that brings from subjectivity to objectivity. The singular experience becomes objective. It's not, what I mean, it's not that it's not objective, you see? When we observe it from the outside, and someone makes a narration of his singular experience, we can see in this singular experience some very important relation to what is society today. So I can say that when someone who experienced war, or who experienced migration, who experienced violence, or whatever, tell us a story. We, as a common body, as a collective body, we can make out of this a dialectical object. You see what I mean? The object becomes an object in between us, and we discuss. We don't experience, we discuss. The person had the experience. We are doing a discussion. This is a very separated way of being in touch with reality. The one of the drama that cannot narrate has the traces of violence in his body, but the impossibility to make a narration out of it. I, as an outstanding body, discussing with a community, I make out of this an object in the middle. It's no more belonging to the person. I take it out of the person. I take possession on this object, on its violence. I take it out and I make out of this something that belongs to us. The distinguish that is important for me to make is that singular is not discursive. You see, it's not dialectical. The perception as embodiment, as gestalt, becomes body for me. To become body for us, we take it out. We take it out with a kind of violence from the person who's narrating the history. We take it out, we put it in the middle, and we make out of it our discursive object. This shift seems easy when we tell it like this. In sociology, in psychoanalysis, in philosophy, in economics, whatever. We can take out an object of experience. Let's say we can take out the experience of 29 depression in America and make out of it an object of economics. We can study it, discuss it from a social point of view, from a political point of view, from an economical point of view. But we cannot take out the experience of the person who lived, who died, more than lived, in this experience. This is not something we can share. What do we do nowadays very much in art? We say, in art teaching, the most important question for me. In art teaching we say, your singular experience is the tool you will work with. So find the shape. But now in these days we say also is an exemplarity of singularity that is significant to community. This shift is never described. How do we take out something singular to make it political? So what does that mean to take the Papuan Indian and to make out of his experience my thinking of colonialism? You see that there is a shift that is very label, not stable, not in clear relation. And this is, to me, the question, the more important question in this moment in art teaching. What does that mean to make out of singular experience exemplarity without working of this shift from singular perception to collective discussion? One of the things that I see as dangerous, I have 30 seconds, is morality. Because one of the tools that is used very much in these questions is to say it is just, it is good, it is a good thing to make significant this singular experience. Every time that morality steps in, the church is not far away. And very dangerous development in art, like degenerate art, is not far away. When morality steps in, when morality takes the path from singularity, from perception to discussion. This is exactly the step Hitler did when he decided in moral terms that the singularity view of Klee, of Schlemmer, of whatever, was not the right one, was not exemplar, to be an example for the others. You see, the dangerous thing now, and I don't have the answer, is what does this step mean? What does the step mean from singular to collective? And what does morality at this point? In this exact shift, what do morality do? This is for me, one of the most dangerous questions we are facing in this moment in art. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bernhard. As always, very important points to think about and maybe discuss after. We will continue immediately with the presentation of Hristina Ivanoska. I'll just read briefly something, again, briefly, from your bio. Currently, more recently, so Ivanoska has been an artist in residence at Prishtina 001 Cultural Center in Ljubljana, Hyde Park Art Center, Chicago, Sculpture Space, Utica, New York, and similar institutions. So we can also talk about artist residency programs and what they do to, or what they can do to artists with similar practice. Since 2000, she is collaborating with the artist Jana Chalowski. Jana, together with a few other colleagues, is part of a project space, Press to Exit, in Skopje. A partner institution for summer school is school. Thank you, Christina. Their projects, collaborative projects, were exhibited in various international contexts and institutions, including the 56th International Venice Biennial Pavilion of the Republic of then Macedonia, today North Macedonia. I'm very happy that you were able to join us for the program this year. Thank you so much. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you for your invitation. I was really looking forward to come to Prishtina because as member of Press to Exit, we always supported this idea and we are one of the partners, so it's always a pleasure to come and be part of the program or as visitors. When they asked me to suggest an abstract and a title for my presentation this evening, I decided to use the title for my PhD thesis that I started in 2014 in the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, and it's titled Document Missing: The Intricate Sense of Truth in Oral Histories. For almost 20 years, I was interested about the non-existing narrative of women's resistance in the state of Macedonia. And as a female being born and raised in a country as Macedonia, at a certain point you start asking a question, who you are or who am I? Because I live in a country that since 28 years ago became finally an independent state. Before it was part of ex-Yugoslavia, and before it was occupied for centuries. So if you're looking for any traces of rebellion actions, movements, especially related to women, it's almost impossible to find documents, or the documents, because it was movement that stayed, to survive it was important to stay invisible, unrecognized by the authorities. So there are barely any written traces, or the traces that you can find comes for international sources, like communication between diplomats or journalists who were visiting this area, let's say in the Ottoman period or later. So it was interesting at one point to find sort of a documents or oral interpretations of historical events in the National Institute of History in Skopje, in Macedonia, that were collected after the Second World War, when Macedonia became one of the republics and finally get its own territory and language and wanted to create its own narrative, historical narrative, cultural narrative. So it was an idea to collect memories of witnesses of important events that were taking place on the territory of Macedonia. So just to now go back in time, in 2002, when very naively, and this is just the beginning of who am I, the question when it was posed, in 2002, very naively I decided to open the map of the city of Skopje. This is not the exact map, but I wanted just to visualize how the city of Skopje looked like and to locate and count the streets which are named after important women. So what I discovered, that at that time, from officially 1,078 streets, there were only 26 named after important women, including the 8th of March and AFG, anti-fascistic women's movement, which is 2.5%. And of course, most of those streets, I also visited all of those streets and make documentations. It doesn't matter if they are on the suburb areas or in the city centers, the tiny little streets with family houses, and this is some visual materials of the state in 2002. There was no boulevard, no infrastructural buildings named after important women. And what was also significant, all those women were partisan women fighting during the Second World War. You would not find the name of a woman that was actively involved before that period. So this was very intriguing for me. I started to ask myself, what was really happening before that period? Because after the Second World War, in socialist Macedonia, there was an interest among the historians to document and to document that period, the Second World War, and how the partisan movement integrated women in their activities and how they gained all the privileges after the war was over. As a reaction to this situation, I decided to, a year later, in 2003, or maybe it was the same year, end of the same year, to inaugurate the first boulevard named after a woman, using my own name, surname, and nickname from that time, because I didn't want to offend anybody. I didn't even want to make myself important, but just to point out that we are lacking of information related to women history. So this plate that was created according to the standard sign for signing boulevards and streets with the size and the design was located in different places in the city, and it ended on the facade of the Museum of Contemporary Art, and after that become part of their collection. In a conversation, a year later, in a conversation with curator and theorist Susanna Milewska, that you will meet tomorrow, she pointed out an interesting event from the beginning of 20th century, because she knew that I'm interested about this women's rebellion movement, and any information that I can find and go and search. And she mentioned two women, Rusa Plavova and Nakia Bayram, and she said that they were trying to organize the Muslim women at the beginning of 20th century in the city of Skopje to do a protest with a public unveiling of the Muslim woman. At the same time, I'm reading in a newspaper that the city of Skopje established a committee, and that every citizen, organization, or institution can submit a proposal to this committee to give proposals for renaming or naming the streets, buildings, or infrastructural objects, and that there is no deadline to the open call. It took me some time to do some research, and from a sentence which I found in a book by Historia and Vera Vescovic-Vangeli, which was very much interested about partisan women in the Second World War and a little bit before that period, I discovered the memories of Rosa Plaveva and Nakia Bayram in the Institute of National History that were not digitalized, that were very fragile, yellowish paper done on a typewriting machine, but with the very valuable sources for me. I discovered that Rosa Plaveva, first of all, was a very interesting woman. That's her. This is one of the photographs, or a photocopy of a photograph. It was almost impossible to find also photo documentation. She was born in the second half of the 20th century. She was educated in Sofia as a tailor. She was born in Veles. She was introduced to the socialist thoughts and movements that were happening in that part of Macedonia. Together with her husband Ilija Plavev, in 1909 they established the first Social Democratic Party in Macedonia. In the 20s she was trying to organize the women in the city of Skopje to get a right to vote. In the 30s she is moving with her husband in Belgrade, where she stayed for the rest of her life. She lived almost a century. She was active in the Second World War, and she had a particular way how she would dress herself. As you could see on the photo, she would have this navy blue suit, a red tie, white shirt, and a medal that she was awarded for being actively involved in the Ilinden uprising in 1903. On the other side, Nakia Bayram, much younger than Rosa Plaveva, was a Turkish teacher. At the time when Rosa Plaveva, as a tailor who had the opportunity to enter the Turkish houses in 1908 and give lectures on tailoring to Turkish women who really lived a very isolated life, mostly inside their houses, was present during the meetings when she was trying to organize the Turkish women, but as a young girl, to come out and unveil themselves publicly. Rosa Plaveva thought that this is a way of modernizing the woman on the territory of Macedonia. They were also trying to prepare flags with slogans like this. So this is all based on the memories of Rosa Plaveva documents which I found in the Institute. Nakia Bayram is coming from an educated family, especially the female were very much educated. She was not covered herself. But what happened? The gathering was discovered by the Turkish authorities. The Turkish soldier entered inside the house. The women were beaten with the sabers of the soldiers, and Rosa Plaveva was arrested and publicly dragged. So everybody could see that this kind of organizing, illegal organizing or gatherings that are against of Ottoman state, Ottoman Empire, will be punished. So she ended also in jail. Nakia Bayram was later, after the Second World War, very much involved in the literate courses, because 80% of the inhabitants of on the territory of Macedonia were illiterate, especially women. So she was involved in those courses. But what happened in the early 50s, in all republics of Yugoslavia, a law was established that forbidden Muslim women to wear fez or ferađe. So they understood this as an attack to their culture, and they withdraw from the whole processes of emancipation, including the illiterate courses. In Vera Vesković Vangeli's book, I found an interpretation that after that, women started covering themselves with a scarf, as you could see in one of the images. That's her interpretation of the situation. To go back to reality, to my reality, preparing the documents in 2005 to submit to the committee of the city of Skopje. And this is 4 years after the conflict that we had in Macedonia between the state Macedonian army and the so-called Albanian Liberation Army, which very much influenced the life in the country itself, but especially in the city of Skopje. The city became divided, very much divided, on the north and south, or Albanian and Macedonian, or Muslim and Christian part of the city. I knew that the city of Skopje at that time was finishing one infrastructural object, and this is that bridge, which is next to the main train and bus station in the city of Skopje. So I decided that my proposal should be that this bridge should be named with these two women, Rosa Plava and Akije Bayram, that almost nobody knew who they were and what they were doing. That is some form of female resistance that should be recognized and established, but also in a way to establish again the connection between these two divided parts of the city. When I went to the city of Skopje to submit my proposal, they didn't know about what kind of committee I'm talking about. First they were all confused. Finally, there was one woman who told me that the committee was dismissed because there was no law according to which they could do all these changes. And because the opening of the bridge was happening very soon, I just wanted to have a meeting with one of the consultants of the, at that time, mayor of the city of Skopje, who was historian, just to see if there is any possibility to get a response to my proposal, which was already submitted to the city of Skopje. And this meeting, which was unofficial, but very, for me, heartbreaking, showed the real situation, the real state of my state. He told me that the bridge such as this could not be named after women. Why I'm pointing out to Rosa Plaveva, who was a social democrat, because we started to become ashamed of the socialist past. That the committee will take lots of time and finances to check the resources, even though I point out every single book and every single document that they could easily find in these few institutions or library, and that if they have to make a decision on naming this bridge, it will be a political decision among the political parties. I realized that the idea of citizens to submit a proposal and expect to be treated with respect, to what they're submitting, what they're trying to point out, was wasting of time. I realized that as a citizen, for them, I'm important as a vote, but not as somebody who is giving ideas or would like to be involved in some democratic processes. The work as I described now, then I transferred into a 3-channel video installation that you could more or less follow this narrative, shifting from the past to the present, introducing Rosa Plava Bayram, and also my situation as a citizen and my proposal submitted to the city of Skopje. Later on, I also created a series of posters, which also, they also looked like a fanzine. They were distributed for free. I wanted to share the story because I realized that especially the citizens of the city of Skopje, whenever I talk about this project or present the video, they always get very much excited. And also give them an opportunity to do whatever they want with this printed material. Rearrange, rewrite, hang, tear apart, so everything was possible. In 2007, I got another invitation to do something similar for an exhibition, for a group and exhibition in Belgrade, also related with the streets, named after important women in Belgrade. I will not go deeper into this project. I wanted to make a difference, just to point out the difference. I decided, so this is how many streets are in, first of all, you can find all the names of women and on this particular website. The percentage is a little bit higher. I decided in this occasion to write a phaeton that will be published in one of the oldest Serbian magazine, Politika. The phaeton would always, I selected 20 women and I was trying to do a pairing according either to their nationalist feeling or through their ideas to create a better society, or they were in the same field of art and culture. So it was quite a challenging format for me. I also realized that it was not difficult for me to find information about these women in Serbia. There were already people, historians, people in the field of literature, who were interested and already trying to do a research, already published books or essays or different fragments of text in magazines. So when I compare the situation in Macedonia, that barely you find a person who is interested about this particular topic and this particular period, the situation in Serbia was completely different. So this returned me back in 2014 when I was preparing my thesis for my PhD in practice program to Rosa Plaveva and her memories. These are scans of the documents which I found in the Institute, but also returning back more than 10 years to this institution that was sharing the same building with the State Archive of, at that time, Republic of Macedonia, now North Macedonia. I realized that a lot of things changed. For example, the Institute, a lot of people got retired or died in the meantime. They were not replaced with new staff members. The woman who was really willing to help me with scanning the documents and look through all these papers, because she was the only one who knew how they're organized in these boxes, because there are no other way of approaching these files. She would be retired in a couple of months. What happened with the State Archive, which building was specially designed in the 60s according all standards, which they had a separate building next to this building with the offices as a depot with all this material should be collected, saved in a proper way. In the meantime, they were moved to another building which belongs to this state project Skopje 2014 in one of this neo-Baroque style building on a rooftop where they have a problem with the leaking of water and then where they function in a substandard conditions. So this looked like a ghosty space when you could see fragments of maybe paintings or posters or I don't know, documents hang on the walls, and now you see only some kind of ghostly shapes that were left on the walls, as you could see here in these particular buildings. And I also started to think, what does it mean if you transfer a whole archive from one site to another? What does it mean? For me, if I have to move it from one place to another, would mean that I have to go through all the stuff, clean it, reorganizing it differently. Does the State Archive has the same method of moving from one place to another? And did they change in this process, in this transferring process, the narrative which already was existing in the previous building? Being curious how the new building of the State Archive exists, I went to search for the dossier of Rosa Plaveva, and this is the dossier related with the Ilinden uprising, because after the Second World War, the Socialist Republic of Macedonia had also an idea to collect memories of people who survived important historical events, especially related to the Ilinden uprising in 1903. So they collected almost 3,500 submissions, because there was a committee who was going through all these narratives, all these documents, supported with witnesses, and they would make a decision which one will be awarded not only with a medal, but also a pension, which was not that little. I realized, when I asked for the dossier of Rosa Plaveva, they brought only 3 pieces of paper. Her statement was missing, and there were only unimportant communication that was happening later on related with the pension and the height of the pension. I asked, where are the documents? And they told me they don't know. They don't have an idea who took it, if it's inside the buildings or not. So I started asking myself how you deal with this topic when documents are missing, when you cannot rely on any written statements, or if your statements are based on oral interpretations, which can be prone on manipulations. So, so in the frame of my PhD, I realized that the only possible way to deal with documents missing is to start a series of performances where I would write and perform the texts. But the writings will be based on existing, non-existing documents related to Rosa, or not at all, something invented, shifting from past to the present, because I also realized that the history is repeating, that what Rosa Plaveva was facing in the first half of the 20th century, the changes of identities, activism, different forms of struggle and rebellion, was happening in sort of a form to me when we had the right wing on power for 10 years, when we were almost every year, every day on the street protesting against their politics, against their decisions. So I also realized that the only possible way to deal with the topic is to use my body as to be embodied by all these different identities, to give a voice not to Rosa, but also to other voices that will appear in my performances. So all the performances are documented with document missing performance number 1, and they can also have a subtitle, like the introduction. This is something similar which I related to where I'm also trying to transform myself, also working with the changes of the body, the change of the voice, my transformation from myself to Rosa and back. Also, working in a dark space, just to give an impression to the audience that I'm dealing with the material that are not existing, that I'm like in a dark room, trying with my little light to find some traces of information that I can integrate, play with, or create some kind of a narrative. Or I would reenact actions that some other woman, which dossier I found in the archive related to Ilinden uprising, would mention what kind of activities she would take in that period. For example, sweeping 2 kilometers of snow so she can cover the steps of the rebellions, or the flag she would wrap around her naked body and she would just go from point A to point B, or she would just give a sign with an illegal weapon to the rebellions that they have to leave the village because the soldiers are nearby. I also wanted to test her methods, challenging myself what I am doing in this particular context, because it's interesting, especially in these 10 years, the activist movement become very, and the civilian movement become very organized, very strong. You would very often find people around me who would declare themselves activists. And I was asking myself what this means, how far you can go to achieve a certain goal, how far you are dedicated to your cause. When I compare with women like Rosa Plaveva, who were just ready to be beaten, stay in a prison, leave their children on the street, what this means in this contemporary context. One of the actions was to eat a piece of paper, because I read that in one particular occasion, they were in communication with Lenin in Russian language. She was also in communication with Rosa Luxemburg in Russian language. She was also collecting signatures for her. You find this in her memories. I cannot prove it. I don't know if this is true or fake, because she was asked to talk about a period from a distance of 40, 30 years. If she invented or not, if she was right or not, I don't know. And she was talking about one particular event when they got a coded letter from Lenin, and the authorities, this is a time when Macedonia were occupied by the Serbs, and they discovered the letter, and they entered in their house, and they found the letter, but because it was coded, they couldn't discover what it was written. It says chair, table, cloth, whatever. They took Rosa Plaveva, and she put her coat on, and while she was walking to the police station, she realized that the letter with the codes she is having in her coat. So when she was left for a second or a minute alone in the police office, she managed to swallow this piece of paper in a second with a one sip of water. Sometimes I do this performance, it's not publicly. I do it in a photograph studio, in my own private space, and you realize that it's not so easy to do this kind of actions, even when somebody told you, yeah, you can just swallow a piece of paper. I will not say anything as a conclusion, because the process is still open. It's something that tickles my curiosity still. I would just say it's a project to be continued, and I will wrap it up here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I open the floor for questions or comments, if anyone has. This is the time. If not, Bernhard said we do it with a beer. I can make a few to start.
If there are no...
Okay, well, thank you.
I would start with you, Hristina. One question, I have some experiences with Skopje recently, and I visited the Museum of History, the newly built. I visited this
Of Macedonian fight and
this new Baroque.
yeah.
It's very interesting that you have some sort of national movement of the idea of a renaissance of a nation. You see how they try hard in the city of Skopje to realize this. But look, this contradiction. At the same time, they build the museum presentation of the history, but the real documents, archives, they scrap in a way. So this is. Can you please comment on this contradiction that at the same time you have an excessive moment of presentation,
Aggressive,
yeah, and also sort of aesthetical excess, aggressive, and at the same time it's destruction of the very material base and essence of this. This is a question. And the question is, just this moment that is obviously crucial, how singularity becomes collective issue or discursive, or becomes a narrative. We can do it in a different way or different levels, like private and public, individual and collective. These are classical, singular and universal. But I had an idea that you were talking about psychoanalysis, and at the very beginning, and I would like to ask you, you probably remember the 70s is a decade in the history of psychoanalysis of rediscovering of the concept of narcissism, both on the level of psychiatric the development of the way of cure with the discovery of borderline conditions, pathological narcissism with Kohut, Campbell on one, and culture of narcissism in the state where you look at, and I was just like thinking, isn't this, this moment in which singularity, so to say, without being truly translated into something collective, narrative, discursive, but it is some sort of through the narcissistic extension becomes political. This is just like trying to motivate you to comment on this.
Okay.
To give an answer to your question. It's interesting when they started to create this museum, they announced an open call to the citizens to collect materials. And when you visit the museum, you barely see some artifacts which are exhibited there. Everything is paintings and vast figures. But I also find contradictory. Now I'm reading some book of a researcher and Professor Kit Brown, who was very much interested about that Ilinden uprising, 10 years before that period, later. He finds, he says that the Ilinden uprising was, according to him, never related to uprising and nationalist spirit among the Macedonians. That was more gathering people who lived on this territory to organize themselves, no matter if they declare themselves Bulgarians, Serbs, Greeks, because there were many influences in that period, to struggle against an Ottoman Empire who was really making their lives difficult to live. And how they were, and how this one particular organization that established 10 years before the Ilinden uprising, who organized the Ilinden uprising, who was for some failure, for us now glorifying as one of the most important nation days. They managed to organize themselves and integrate 20,000 people in this movement that was barely visible to the authorities or to the diplomat corps who was present in the Ottoman Empire. And that they were coming from different, first from villagers to intellectuals, from people who declare this or that, and what kind of feeling or aspirations were gathering this group of inhabitants in this territory to organize this kind of uprising that was from a very beginning a suicidal when you compare to the power of the Ottoman Empire in that period. And what happened to Skopje and to the state of Macedonia, having this right wing for 10 years and this erasure of the very aggressive erasure of the socialist past and creating some Macedonian nationalist pride through these sculptures and buildings, to me personally create an emotion that it's very difficult to explain. And it's not anger, it's not confusion. You realize that it's difficult to, because it was happening in such a short time, I live in the city center. You wake up and the city is transformed. This happened in 4 years. There was no control. They had all the power, no matter that it was a certain group of citizens, majority, who thought differently, who was fighting against this idea of rewriting the history in this way, or complete degradation of the public space and occupation of the public space. And usually you get questions from the foreigners coming to visit your city, why you're not getting inspired about this. How you get inspired when it's so aggressive and it's so present. And it's a reality of your own child. How you tell your child that this is not his city, where he is born and raised. That my city of Skopje was completely different. My interpretation of history was completely different.
Like Hiroshima.
Like Hiroshima.
Yes.
But Hiroshima reminded me of the earthquake of Skopje, 1963, when 80% of the city was demolished, when the generations who lived in the city of Skopje before the earthquake suffered for that old Skopje. I didn't remember because I was not born. I was born 74. I couldn't understand these people, what they were talking about. And now I'm like those old people who are talking about the modern Skopje after 1963. Sad.
Maybe I answer a question? It's a very interesting question you're posing, because the 70s are very interesting in art, because they are very depressing. I don't say it negatively. Huh? When I say this, I think about a work is for me very important, it's the work of Vita Conci, that is very linked to this question of psychoanalysis. And it is an onanistic work, said in psychoanalytic terms. It's to make it very short, Vita Conci was a poet. It's very important that this is activity as a poet, as a writer. He wanted to become a priest, a Catholic priest. And then he became a contemporary artist, a performer. And this shift is, it's a very important shift. And in this work, there is always something that is vital, like the onanistic action, to be under the ground of the gallery, masturbating, is something that is a kind of pleasure or of potentiality that will never be completed. There will never be life after. I see it in a very central relation, in a very important relation for me to what is after the wars that ended the Second World War. And Vietnam is the last of these wars. And in this sense, World War II would never end until the end of this moment. So I think that the artist, and what you say about the history in psychoanalysis and what we're working the psychoanalysis in these years, it was also in this idea of borderline, in this idea of positions that stepped out of society in a radical way, in a radical otherness, I would say. What interests me in this is the possibility of the otherness. But what is different from our situation today, I would say, that all this radical position of performer, Vita Conci talks very much about this. It's a very important text of Vita Conci in 1979, where he explains that he was doing a performance in Florence that was named Dance Floor. He was dancing imaginary with two women, and he was narrating by dancing the non-relation to those two women. And the third day, an American spectator stepped in and said, if you don't want to make sex with these two women, do it with me. And she began to get her clothes off. And in this moment, Vitaconci did as if she was not there. And Vitaconci says, I always thought that performance was in real life, that we were not in theater, that we were acting politically, and I understood in this moment that I was not acting politically. And then he began to do public art. He stopped performance and began his work in public art. And I think that is an important question to say about narcissism, because it is a way of stepping out of confrontation and of discursive relationship. What we are doing today seems to me very different from this period, because we are saying that acting in a singular way is meaningful. All the studies in psychoanalysis are working out what does that not mean. You see, what this onanistic or stepping out system does say about the non-will of being in society. This was the study of psychoanalysis. That was really studying of psychoanalysis in this period. Now we are saying that being singular is not stepping out. And this is for me a very strange question, because I think that much of the work we do in art is a kind of stepping out in a very hard political way. It is political because it's stepping out in a Foucauldian contre-espace reflection. So when you, let's say in Foucault terms, when you make a space against, it's against. It's a singular space, but it's against something. So what we are saying today is that this singularity is significant, so it is taken back to society and to discursivity, and all the singularity is switched off. And this is for me more problematic. But it is a very interesting question about the 70s, because it was a real radical stepping out, or a radical being other than the others, not with the others. And art was very strong in this dimension at the time. Think of the performance of the beginning before of the performance of Bruce Nauman getting his head on the wall of his workshop. Since it is a non-being there. I'm not there, I'm not there, I'm not there. This is for me a very interesting form of the art. We are denying this today.
Thank you. Any other questions? But today is not 70s, that's why.
No, we are not in the 70s. Time has run.
I just want to reflect a bit to end the day here on what Hristina was showing about her work. And it's interesting how your PhD also developed, maybe in relation to even uprising, but also to one of the characters in your work. Let's say, I'm interested to know about the other character. I mean, the character. Did you research more, or did you work on that side of the story? Because also, if you pay attention to mentioning of, you could also say identities, but also a naming of one or the other, let's say, character in the story. So while one character has a fixed identity, right? So she's Macedonian. The other character, also how you say the story, appears as a Muslim or maybe as a Turk. And then in relation to the last war was between Macedonians and Albanians. And I'm just interested in this complexity. Because also naming of people of Muslim origin during the Ottoman Empire caused a lot of issues, not only in relation to Albanians, but also Bosnians in former Yugoslavia. And a lot of these national identities were very fluid and constructed only after dramatic times, let's say, for this territory. I was just interested how does this play, this layer of complexity in relation to your research?
Nakia Bayram, this is all that you can find related to her public life. Her husband, Ferit Bayram, was much more active. She was also social democrat, also very much involved with Ilya Plavev and Rusa Plaveva and other social democrats. They also published their own magazine. There is a street in Skopje named after him. Nakia Bayram probably was a completely different character than Rusa Plaveva. She stayed probably in that position to be a teacher and to educate. And I even, during my research, I talked with her grandson, who was my Gazanfer Bayram, who was my professor in high school for applied art, just to get more information about his grandmother. I didn't know that she was his grandmother. I just asked what is the connection between the two of them. This is that I could only find about her. He also said, she was my grandmother. I don't know what she was doing besides being a teacher, but she was very very strong woman, very determined, stoic. She was also teaching him in this kind of behavior and acceptance of life. Pointing out Macedonians, Albanians, Turkish, Muslim, Christian. This is not something that didn't exist, especially in the religion. It was very much defined, maybe as to which national group they belonged. Especially among the Slavics, they were confronted. They were not clear who they are because there were many different influences. Religiously, who was Muslim or who were Christian, that was always clear. That's my feeling from the materials or some books that I was reading. And it's very much present in our society. And it's not something that you can avoid. Even if I avoid using if they belong to this or that group or religion, according to the name, you will know to whom I'm talking about. So it's something that is very much present in our societies. It's not easy to, but it's also according to me, something that we have to embrace. That we are different, that we are, I don't know, or maybe the same, whoever, that there are varieties that can be embraced, that they live together, and they live together for centuries. I don't know if I answered your question.
Okay, I think there are
Just kind of a short one. It's connected to yours. I can just speak loud for Hristina, which is your focus. There's this big empty spot for me in the conversation, in the sense that you want to look at through feminism. You want to look at the role of women, right?
Yes.
And then these narratives being pulled back to the 70s, the specific male names of iconic pieces being mentioned, and in some way that also creates this color vacuum or something. And at this moment in the West, there's big movements afoot. There's the Me Too movement that's now years old now, and other developments that kind of are putting more emphasis and light on the very question of feminism and equality and development. And as you speak about Skopje, Macedonia, it makes me sad. Because if this is the focus and where is the state of contemporary society within these questions right now in Skopje? You know? It's actually direct.
But also you have to understand that this is a project that started a long time ago, just to put some perspective. But yes, please.
Yeah, it started in 2002. It's a good question and I'm trying to find an answer. But also, yeah, I'm not, in this character of Rusa Plavova, I'm not also glorifying this particular woman. And if you want, I don't know, if you want to take her as a Macedonian, I don't know, Orthodox, whatever, social democrat, I don't know what he was believing, if she was religious or not, I couldn't find any, or she would declare this and that. Because you also find connections with very close connections with different communities who live there, I mean. But there also, she's somebody that I can relate and I can also position myself through her, not trying to glorify her, also try to find weaknesses, also question my position today, how I understand the complexity of society, how I understand myself in this society, especially when you have an opportunity to live in a very turbulent time, in very intense time, like we had just recently. And we live in a society where these divisions are very much present, but not that are created by the citizens. I think it's created by the politics. And that's something that we can never overcome. The groups in certain states, they are isolated. And it's very difficult to find a space in between where they could see that they have a common goal and common interest. It happened during this citizens movement, but when the government changed, we are repeating again the same narrative, which is embarrassing. I don't know if I answered your question, but I was.
Of course, it's a topic and issue that concerns, I mean, all of us both, but just not to make this super long. If anyone else doesn't speak out, I'm going to close it here. And thank you both for your work and your presentation. Thank you so much. We continue tomorrow. Starting at 7 o'clock with the presentation by Boris Buda and Zimri Soka. Of course, I invite you all for this series of presentation. Thank you so much.